There is a farm in Pennsylvania where the same soil has been growing food for over 100 years. No tractor has ever touched it. No bag of fertilizer has ever been opened on it, and it has never once been watered from a hose. Yet season after season, it produces more food per square foot than the commercial farms sitting right beside it. The families who work this land are Amish. They do not sell their method. They do not teach it in classes or post about it online. They simply do what their grandparents did and what their grandparents did before them, using a technique so simple that most people walk right past it without ever seeing it. A group of soil scientists visited this farm in the early 2000s. They tested the ground, measured the biology living inside it, and wrote up everything they found. And then they quietly filed their reports away. No press release, no announcement, no recommendation to the millions of home gardeners struggling to grow half as much on 10 times the budget. We have been told our whole lives that a good garden takes hard work, that you have to dig the soil, feed it with chemicals, and fight the weeds every single season just to get a decent harvest. But what if everything we were taught was designed to keep us buying, not growing? What if the most productive soil in America has never once seen a rototiller? The Amish have known the answer for a century. And what those scientists found on that Lancaster County farm is something the gardening industry has never wanted you to hear. Most gardeners will tell you the same story. It starts with hope. A fresh plot of ground, seeds in hand, and the feeling that this year is going to be different. And maybe the first season is good, maybe even the second. But somewhere around year 3 or 4, something quietly shifts. The tomatoes come in smaller. The beans look tired. The soil that once felt soft and dark starts feeling a little more like clay and a little less like the promise it once held. So you do what you were taught. You dig deeper. You add more fertilizer. You water on a schedule. You fight every weed like your harvest depends on it. And somehow, despite all of that effort, the garden keeps asking for more while giving back less. This is not a story about bad luck or a bad gardener. This is the story of almost every home garden in America right now. Researchers who have studied backyard vegetable plots across the United States found something that should have made front-page news. Over the past 40 years, the average yield per square foot in home gardens has steadily declined. Not in every garden, not every single year, but the trend, measured across thousands of plots over decades, points in one direction, down. And during that same 40-year window, sales of fertilizer, soil amendments, and garden chemicals have more than doubled. Gardeners are spending more money on their soil than any previous generation, and they are growing less food than their grandparents did on the same square footage with none of those products. That is not a coincidence. That is a pattern. And when you look at it honestly, the pattern starts to look less like a mystery and more like a design. The same companies that sell you the fertilizer also benefit when your soil needs more of it next year. The same industry that promoted annual tilling as the mark of a serious gardener also sells the tiller. The system you were handed was not built around your harvest. It was built around your spending. But here is the part that most people never find out. The decline in soil health that drives all of that spending does not come from neglect. It does not come from bad weather or bad seeds or not trying hard enough. It comes from following the instructions exactly as they were written. Somewhere in the years right after World War II, the blueprint for the modern garden was drawn up, not by farmers, not by soil scientists, not by anyone who had ever grown food for a living. It was drawn up in a factory. And what came out of that factory reshaped the way an entire country thought about the ground beneath their feet. That story is darker than most gardening books will ever tell you. When World War II ended, the factories did not go quiet. They could not afford to. The industrial machinery that had spent 5 years producing explosives at a scale the world had never seen was still running, still employing hundreds of thousands of workers, still burning through raw materials by the trainload. The problem was that the war was over. The bombs were no longer needed. But the ammonium nitrate those factories produced to make them, that chemistry did not disappear. It just needed a new customer. The answer the industry found was elegant in its simplicity. The same compound that had been packed into shells and dropped over Europe could be repackaged, renamed, and sold to the American homeowner as plant food. The nitrogen that once fueled explosions would now, they said, fuel your garden. Same chemistry, new bag, new profit. The rototiller industry arrived at the same moment with the same message. Till your soil every spring. Disturb it, turn it, break it open. The machine that churned through earth became the symbol of the serious modern gardener. And together the fertilizer and the tiller locked hands around the American backyard and never let go. What no advertisement ever showed you was what was happening 6 inches beneath the surface. Under every healthy garden, under every thriving forest and productive field, there is a network so vast and so complex that scientists are still mapping it today. It is built from fungal threads, thinner than a human hair, stretching for yards in every direction, weaving through the soil, and connecting plant roots to each other like a living internet. These threads carry water. They carry nutrients. They send chemical signals from one plant to another, and they hold the soil together in soft, crumbly clusters that trap moisture and feed the life inside them. This network is the reason healthy soil feels alive when you squeeze it in your hand. It is the invisible engine under everything that grows. A single pass of a rototiller severs this network in thousands of places at once. The threads that took months to grow are cut in minutes. The clusters they held together collapse into dust. And something else happens that no one talks about at the garden center. The pore spaces inside the soil, the tiny gaps that hold oxygen and let water drain, those collapse too. The ground that looks airy and loose right after tilling is, at the microscopic level, beginning a slow process of compaction that gets worse with every year you repeat it. But here is the cruel trick. After you till, the garden looks better for a season. The disturbance releases a burst of stored nutrients from the broken threads and dying organisms beneath the surface. The plants respond. The harvest feels like proof that the system is working. What you are actually watching is the soil spending everything it saved. Within 2 or 3 seasons, those savings are gone. And right on schedule, you reach for the fertilizer bag. The factory got exactly what it needed. But there was one corner of America where none of this ever took hold. One community that the machinery salesmen and the fertilizer reps simply never reached. And the soil they left behind tells a story that changes everything. In the rolling farmland of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, the machinery salesmen did come. They drove the same roads. They knocked on the same kinds of doors. They carried the same glossy catalogs full of tillers and fertilizer bags and the promise of a modern garden. And in the Amish communities scattered across those hills, they were politely turned away, not out of stubbornness, not out of ignorance. The Amish understood perfectly well what those machines were designed to do. But their faith communities had long held a guiding principle that technology adopted too quickly, without careful consideration of how it changes the way a family lives and works together, is technology that costs more than it saves. Mechanized farm equipment was one of the things they chose not to bring inside the fence. And so while every neighboring county was churning its ground each spring and emptying fertilizer bags each summer, the Amish kept doing what they had always done. They layered their soil. They left it undisturbed. And season after season, they grew food. What nobody realized at the time was that this quiet refusal had created something remarkable. Across hundreds of Amish family plots, on land that had been managed the same way for generations, an accidental experiment was running. On one side of the fence, conventionally managed soil was being tilled and treated every year. On the other side, the same native ground had never once been turned. Nature was running a controlled study, and nobody had set it up on purpose. When agricultural researchers from Penn State began quietly documenting these communities in the 1990s and into the early 2000s, the numbers they found did not fit the standard models. The fungal networks in long-managed Amish garden soil were not just healthier than neighboring plots. They were dramatically, almost inexplicably healthier. With concentrations of soil fungi measured at roughly 4 times the levels found in conventionally tilled ground nearby. Earthworm populations were so dense they exceeded the upper ranges of standard measurement scales. And organic matter, the single most reliable indicator of long-term soil fertility, was not holding steady in these plots. It was growing. Year after year, decade after decade, the soil was getting richer without anyone adding anything to it from outside. The researchers wrote up what they found, and then quietly, the reports were filed away. Here is the part that should stop you completely. The method the Amish were using was not something their ancestors invented. It was not a Pennsylvania tradition or a religious practice passed down through their particular community. The layering system they preserved is one of the oldest agricultural techniques in human history. Farmers in ancient Mexico used it. Rice growers in China used it. Peasant gardeners across medieval Europe used it. For thousands of years, across cultures that never met each other, people who grew food had independently arrived at the same conclusion, that covered, undisturbed ground grows more than bare, broken ground. The Amish did not discover this secret. They simply never forgot it. So what, exactly, is the method? What do you actually do? After a century of unbroken practice, passed from grandparent to grandchild without a book or a video or a single product being sold, the answer is almost shockingly simple. The method is this: you cover the ground and you never uncover it again. That is not a simplification. That is the whole thing. A deep layer of organic material, straw, wood chips, fallen leaves, composted manure, laid across the entire surface of your garden bed at a depth of 8 inches or more. Not 4 inches, not 6, 8 at minimum. Or deep enough that sunlight cannot reach the soil beneath it. Deep enough that weed seeds sitting just under the surface never get the signal to wake up. Deep enough that the ground below stays cool and damp even when the air above it is hot and dry. Each season, you do not remove the old layer. You do not turn it or rake it aside or haul it to a compost bin. You simply add a new layer on top of whatever is already there. The material from last season is already breaking down, already feeding the fungal threads, rebuilding beneath it, already drawing earthworms up from deeper in the ground to work through it in the dark. You are not managing the soil. You are feeding a system that manages itself. When it is time to plant, you part the layers with both hands, press your seeds or seedlings directly into the undisturbed soil underneath, and close the material back around the stem. That is the entire act of planting. No digging, no bed preparation, no amendment. The ground beneath the layers, left alone long enough, already has everything a root needs to grow. There is one thing you must know before you start, because it is the reason most people who try this method give up before it works. The first season will likely disappoint you. Your yields may be flat. They may even be slightly lower than what you grew before. This is not the method failing. This is the soil doing the most important work it will ever do. Underground, invisibly, where you cannot see it. The fungal network that was broken by years of tilling needs a full growing season to begin recolonizing the root zone. The earthworm population needs one full winter under consistent, undisturbed cover before it grows large enough to noticeably change how the ground drains and breathes. Everything that is going to make your garden extraordinary next year is happening right now beneath the surface. The gardeners who walk away in year one do so just weeks before the soil would have shown them what it had been building. There is one more thing, and it matters. Not all layering material is safe. Hay cut from fields that were sprayed with a common pasture herbicide called aminopyralid carries chemical residues that do not break down in a compost pile and do not break down in the soil for several seasons after application. Plants grown in contaminated mulch twist at the stem, curl their leaves, and stop producing, and most gardeners never connect the damage to the hay they laid down months earlier. Before you bring any mulch material into your garden, mix a handful of it with clean potting soil, plant a few bean seeds in a small pot, and set a second pot beside it with clean soil only. Wait 3 weeks. If the beans in the test pot grow twisted or stunted while the control pot grows straight, do not use that material. The method is real. The science behind it is documented. And yet if you called your local agricultural extension office today and asked them to recommend it, most of them would not. The question of why that recommendation has never come from the same institutions that quietly confirmed everything the Amish soil data showed leads somewhere that the gardening industry would very much prefer you did not look. The agricultural extension offices that quietly documented what was happening in those Amish gardens never made a public recommendation because there was nothing in that recommendation that could be sold. No product, no machine, no annual purchase, a bag of straw from a local farm, and the decision to stop digging does not generate a revenue stream. And the institutions that shape official gardening advice in this country are not funded by people who benefit from you spending less. That is the answer to the question this video has been carrying since the beginning. The silence was not scientific. It was financial. But here is what that silence could not stop. The soil in Lancaster County kept building anyway. It did not need a press release. It did not need a recommendation. It just needed to be left alone. Soil scientists who study long-managed no-dig plots have documented something they call legacy fertility. It develops slowly over decades of unbroken cover as the fungal networks mature and deepen and the organic layers compress into something closer to forest floor than garden bed. After about 25 years of consistent layering without disturbance, the nutrient cycle in that soil becomes largely self-sustaining. It continues producing through drought years. It continues through crop failures. It continues after the gardener who built it is gone. The ground does not need you to survive anymore. You built something that outlasts you. That is how the Amish think about soil, not as a resource you use up and replace, as something you tend across generations. The 100-year field in Lancaster County is not a gardening achievement. It is a message, from every pair of hands that layered it before to every pair of hands that will layer it after. The soil there is not just fertile, it is continuous. It carries the memory of everything that was ever grown in it, decomposed into it, and trusted to it. Nothing about it looks like a revolution. It looks like a pile of old straw on quiet ground. The scientists who visited that field and said nothing did not bury the data because it was wrong. They said nothing because there was nothing to sell. And that silence, more than any tiller, more than any fertilizer bag, more than any glossy catalog that ever landed on a front porch, is why most of us are still out there breaking ground that was never meant to be broken. The field is still there. It is still producing. The only question left is what you are willing to leave behind.